So we're celebrating our self-determination. So the only thing I can say to people who aren't of African descent, whose
Yes.
ancestors didn't go through enslavement, is if you want to celebrate Juneteenth, you're going to have to now not only learn about where it came from and what we do on that ritual day, but commit to building another type of society. Otherwise, this is our 4th of July. I really don't know how the two mix.
Welcome, welcome, welcome. You are listening to Building the Black Educator Pipeline, where we talk to real people in the real struggle, doing the real work. I'm your host, Shayna Terrell, educator activist dedicated to the lifelong struggle of freedom and liberation for my people. I am here today with our resident Baba, Dr. Greg Carr, associate professor at Howard University, host of In Class with Carr and the Black Table. Doc, we are here today to discuss Juneteenth, brother. How are you?
Indeed, I'm doing fine. It's good to see you. It's good to see you in person. Good to see the family. Good to be
Yes.
on Odun Day weekend where our people gather. And in some ways, Juneteenth is a variation on Odun Day. It's a Black self-determination holiday that is now a federal holiday in the United States. So everybody can take the day off and learn about Juneteenth. So I'm glad you're doing this quick pop-up.
Yes. So, Doc, there's so many people out there that Juneteenth has become like a new thing to them. They've never seen it, never heard of it. Can you tell us a little bit about what Juneteenth is?
Absolutely. I'll give you a quick 30 seconds on the actual document. June 19th, 1865, Gordon Granger, who here's a picture of him, General Gordon Granger, United States military in Texas, stood near Galveston Bay on the mouth of the Gulf of Mexico. Actually, he didn't. His staff officer, Major F.W. Emory, read something called General Order Number 3. In the Army, they give general orders. The first of those, they gave out 5 that day. The first one was telling the Confederates, we here, y'all lost. The second one was addressed to another topic. And the third read as follows. One paragraph. The people of Texas are informed that in accordance with a proclamation from the Executive of the United States, all slaves are free. That proclamation, of course, being the Emancipation Proclamation from 2 years before. This involves an absolute equality of personal rights and rights of property between former masters and slaves, and the connection heretofore existing between them becomes that between employer and hired labor. The freedmen are advised to remain quietly at their present homes and work for wages. They are informed that they will not be allowed to collect at military posts and that they will not be supported in idleness either there or elsewhere. So even as they are calling themselves free and African people, they're delivering shade to the United States government. Y'all stay on the plantation and they're going to magically pay you instead. And don't come over here to the army lines. We ain't got nothing for you. And don't be idle. Now, they done built the whole damn country, but they idle. So Juneteenth is the day that marks that day in June 19th, 1865, when that order, special General Order Number 3, was read. So the first celebration, of course, will be the following year, 1866. And in Texas, they've been doing it ever since. Oklahoma, Texas, all places in the South and the Southwest. And then it spread. There are Juneteenth celebrations in places like Rochester, Minnesota. I've gone to many in Philly over the years. They're everywhere from Buffalo, New York to Charleston, South Carolina. And I'll just say one other thing. Juneteenth is a part of Black self-determination rituals. So before Juneteenth in the United States, January 1st was a day that was marked. And that's, of course, because the Emancipation Proclamation was to go into effect January 1st, 1863. And it is one of the origins of Watch Night. So in places like Philly and New York, Black folk who were free went to church on the last day of December, prayed in the new year, and then celebrated the new year, and then said, okay, now, 1863, let's go get these guns and end this war. Because Black people freed themselves. And so it was January 1st. We still do Watch Night. Many people go to church. In the Caribbean, it's August. These are the rites of August. Somewhere in the first week of August, there are a lot of what they call Emancipation Days in places like Trinidad and other places. And then, of course, all these freedom days are associated with celebration, and also with community. So at Juneteenth, there's going to be parades. They often have pageants. Miss Juneteenth pageant. I have a couple of students who are running for Miss Juneteenth in various places in the country.
I love that.
But they're also running foot races, speeches. They were often affiliated with churches, which means that you often saw the rituals that we affiliate with homecoming when we think of churches and or HBCUs now these days. A lot of prayers, a lot of eating, the food of Juneteenth, red cake, red soda, barbecue. There are Juneteenth foods. So all that congeals around this notion that we are not only here, but we are going to build. So it's a community ritual.
And what would you say, especially in today's society, what is the significance? Meaning, Black people who knew the history have been celebrating it for ages, right? It's been something that's been very personal to the Black community, especially when you talk about people from the South or like people in Texas. I always hear folks talking about how their families, that'd be the special day they may go to the shore, go to the beach, but it was something that was very celebratory and personal to them. Now it's kind of blown up to be, like you said, a federal holiday, and like, you know what happens when we do that, right? They start to commercialize things.
That's right.
But talk about what its significance is to Black people now, and what it should mean to us now.
That's a great question, Shayna. You know, I've been saying it. We said this when we talked about Juneteenth last year. In some ways, I was in Philly for a Juneteenth ritual at Cabrini University, and then got on a plane and flew to Atlanta. And on the way from the airport to another celebration, I saw all these people, all these cars lined up, and we getting into the neighborhoods, and I'm smelling the barbecue smoke, hearing the music. People got the bidwits and the spades table set up, and I said, you know, this is what we're going to do anyway. But we've got another holiday. Now, the year before, as we talked about, I was there when they signed the Juneteenth legislation, when President of the United States signed it. I was there in the White House. And, you know, members of the Congressional Black Caucus are there. I'm standing with some of the security, Secret Service, police, everybody's in the room. I'm standing with a couple of brothers and sisters from Texas, ironically. And so I asked the young sister, I said, what you think? And she said, well, we've been doing this all along, so I'm glad to see everybody catching up. And we back there laughing. And I said that to say this. On Tuesday of Juneteenth week, there was a concert at the White House, on the South Lawn of the White House. My band, Tennessee State University. Don't let the Jackson State block fool you now. I'm down with you, I love, but I'm a Tennessee State Tiger, but you know I rep all HBCUs. But Hampton was there. Tennessee State was there. The Fifth Jubilee Singers sang. It was beautiful. Lettucey did a beautiful rendition of Let's Stay Together, Al Green. It was with Jennifer Hudson. It was a wonderful thing. Method Man was the MC, because when we saw him on the program, I said, what Method Man going to do? He can't do none of his songs, but I'm saying, is he going to come here and say cash rules he's going to tell the truth. But anyway, so the highlight, beside Lettucey and everybody, was, for me, was Mother Opal Lee, who was at the bill signing. They call her the mother of Juneteenth. She's 96 years old. After the Vice President of the United States spoke, who opened with the history, some of the things I've been talking about, Mother Lee got up to the podium and she said, we are the strongest nation in the United States. And people, I'm sure, thought she misspoke. And maybe she did. But in my ear, it was perfect. Because in our Africana Studies framework, that was a governance statement. Whether she meant it, she's talking to us, Black folk, because we are the strongest nation in the United States. But anyway, and then she went on just for a couple of minutes, and then she ended with this. She gave an enumeration of the litany of abuses we suffer. Underfunded education, no health care, no access to high quality employment, this kind of thing. We're struggling, but we're going to survive. And then she said, and then when you start talking about global warming, she ended with this. She said, I tell you what, we're either all going to work this out together, or, and here's a direct quote, we're all going to hell in a handbasket. And then she just walked away from the podium. Mind, she walked up there, 96 years old. Okay, well, I guess I said all that to say this. Juneteenth is like the 4th of July meets Kwanzaa. Juneteenth is like Odun Day, which is Yoruba New Year. It's been going on for almost 50 years in Philly on the second week of June. And the Black world comes down to South Street. Most of those people are not Yoruba, but they're Black people. And they know this is our self-determination ritual. In the Caribbean, the Independence Day and the Emancipation Day rituals are Black. Our homecomings are Black. Our family reunions are Black. Another ritual that comes out of Juneteenth, because once you escape enslavement, you start looking for your people. And so Juneteenth is really like Kujichagulia, self-determination, unity, umoja. It's like these principles. And the colors of Juneteenth aren't red, black, and green, but every shirt I saw in the airport and in Philly and Atlanta, and then Odun Day, they selling red, black, and green Juneteenth shirts. I'm saying just like Kwanzaa. But the 4th of July, which ironically Juneteenth leads into, was about the 13 colonies, 13 North American colonies of Great Britain fighting with their mama. And well, Juneteenth is the Africans who were enslaved fighting with the United States. So it's a mashup. I see the president of the United States and they the White House and everybody talking it. I'm thinking to myself, this is the holiday on the calendar that can't be assimilated. This is going to give this country great indigestion. Why? Because you can't spin this story. This was us against you. So we're celebrating our self-determination. So the only thing I can say to people who aren't of African descent, whose ancestors didn't go through enslavement, is if you want to celebrate Juneteenth, you're going to have to now not only learn about where it came from and what we do on that ritual day, but commit to building another type of society. Otherwise, this is our 4th of July. I really don't know how the two mix. And we know why it's a federal holiday. Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, and Big George Floyd, who went to Jack Yates High School. Jack Yates was a brother who came out of enslavement. He and some other brothers put together money to buy Emancipation Park in Houston, where they celebrated the first Juneteenth. The brother who graduated from that school, who lost his life on African Liberation Day in Minneapolis, and that weekend of Memorial Day weekend, George Floyd. Those sisters were killed. We got in the streets. They were throwing everything in the street from statues and just kind of thinking, like, whoa, what could we do? Holiday. Okay, hey. But guess what? All that does now is help us advance the struggle if we'll seize the opportunity. To me, that's kind of some of the things around the meaning of Juneteenth.
I love that. And you already went into it, but I think that this is important for people to hear a little bit more about how can people help support Black people without trying to appropriate our culture. Because there's a lot of conversation when we talk about Juneteenth around, oh, it should be an inclusive holiday. And it's like, inclusive to what? Like the enslavement wasn't inclusive, right? Like, so
exactly. Come on, get that dance.
So inclusive to what? To who?
What? To who? To do it. I mean, you know this, being a New Yorker and living back and forth, all up and down the East Coast. I know this as a Southerner, born in Tennessee. As a child, we learned about Hanukkah.
Yep.
To the best of my memory, from kindergarten through 12th grade, maybe I went to school with 15, 20 Jewish students who I knew were Jewish, maybe more, but not very many more, certainly in the early grades. But I learned about Hanukkah. Why? Because there was a time when a lot of Jewish teachers were in the public schools, but also, and more importantly, this was a declaration of respect. So as a 7 or 8-year-old, I knew what a dreidel was. I knew what the Festival of Lights was. I didn't know Umoja, Kujichagulia. I did not know Nia and Imani. I didn't know the principles of Kwanzaa. But in places like New York City, Black school teachers, largely women, in the 1970s and 80s, introduced Kwanzaa in those schools as something people need to become aware of. I think Juneteenth, like Kwanzaa, like, for that matter, Hanukkah, those are days where you might not be from that community, but you can learn about that community. And it engenders respect. So there's a way to celebrate through education. And if you want to know about Juneteenth, it's here now for all of us to know. And it's a beautiful thing to see how it proliferates. But it comes with a difficult, I mean, there are a lot of things around Juneteenth that are, let's say, there are things that you can't turn away from once you've seen them. And those are the main things, that this anti-CRT, that this book banning, that this attempt to fire teachers, K-12 and university, the things that are the most unspoken about and unvoiced about Juneteenth are the things that terrify these people the most.
What do you mean by that? Right? So I'm hearing you say, and I'm hearing you give examples, but listeners are probably like, well, what's unspoken about it?
Oh, okay. Well, we know in April 1865, for example, that Robert E. Lee surrendered to General Grant at Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia, not far from where I'm sitting right now in D.C. In Texas, they didn't accept that. They looked at the surrender at Appomattox in April 1865 as a pause to let them regroup. The Confederates were rushing to Texas to try to continue the Civil War. Remember, Texas hadn't been a state, but for about 20 years. Texas saw itself as a country then and now, as they send people trying to escape violence to other states.
That's true.
They were going to regroup, and they were going to regroup in Texas and Mexico because the French had invaded Mexico and the Mexicans had beat them back a couple of times. They had a very famous Battle of Puebla on the 5th of May where they defeated the French army. That's why it's called Cinco de Mayo. And they linked it to the Emancipation Proclamation because Mexico had outlawed slavery, but the French had come back in and had achieved the upper hand. These are the unvoiced things. They were going to continue the Civil War. In fact, my man Gerald Horne's book, The Counter-Revolution of 1836, does a great job of, as we talked about last year, of talking about that. Juneteenth may have been June 19th, 1865, but one of the bitter truths of it is that Texas did not quit in 1865 June. Meaning there were black folk who remained captive to white folk in Texas for years after that. Because once Juneteenth was announced, now the Army had to go and enforce it, just like the Emancipation Proclamation. 9th, 10th Cavalry, Buffalo Soldiers, 24th, 25th regiments of the Army. You had black soldiers who were marching through Texas. Now they had to fight to make it real. The unvoiced history of Juneteenth includes the fact that they tried to keep black people enslaved in Texas after 1865 and succeeded, unfortunately, too often. The unvoiced history of Juneteenth includes the fact that from that moment all the way through to now, we've never had a moment where we couldn't fight apartheid, whether it be voting rights. A lot of those cases came out of Texas, whether it be just the settler violences, the lynchings and all of that. We have continued to fight. In Mexico, Mexico got the upper hand and they executed Maximilian, the puppet French emperor, on June 19th, 1866. Gerald said there are two Juneteenths. Do we even know the history of settler colonialism in Mexico? These are uncomfortable things. And then the other thing I would mention is the fact that, when we look at our people, when we look at African people, the people that Ms. Opal, whether willing, consciously or unconsciously, said we the strongest nation in the United States, we know that June 19th is more than just a date. It recognizes the fact that anytime we have won victories, we come together to pass that memory on. So if you go to Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, you're going to find different dates that were celebrated, not June 19th. Why? Because remember, the Army is moving across the Mississippi into Texas. So everywhere they're telling people becomes that version of Juneteenth. Juneteenth is a late date that summer because you hear it being spread as the Army is going. And as that happens, there are a lot of people who say, well, we'll go down fighting. We're not going to let y'all go. And so, this has been a fight and it's very uncomfortable because if you're going to build something different, you're going to have to acknowledge that this place has never been the place that you claim it was when these slave masters signed a piece of parchment at the old Pennsylvania State House down there off Market Street called Independence Hall. It was never America, as Langston Hughes said.
Yes, and we're going to have to acknowledge that even when something is law and written in stone, there are people who will still go down death to fighting to say, no, it's not. Our reality is going to stay what it is. Well, Doc, thank you so much for the word today on Juneteenth. I hope everybody has a happy, celebratory community with love celebrating Juneteenth this coming Monday, the 19th. But Doc, I thank you.
Thank you. Oh, of course, by the time this is released, I'm Shayna, in the next couple of minutes, affirmative action may be over too. So just when you said that, it reminds me because the Supreme Court is going to decide any minute about affirmative action. And remember, y'all, any attempt not to address the ills in this country based on race, the U.S. Constitution, because of the amendments that came out of the Civil War and Reconstruction, 13th, 14th, and 15th, you can use those amendments to address remedies based on race. When people say, oh, legally, you can't use race. No, those are judges. And so pay very close attention to the Supreme Court cases that are going on right now, because these are judges interpreting the Constitution. There's no language in that Constitution that precludes remedies based on race. It's all the judges interpreting the Constitution. And Ketanji Brown Jackson been writing her behind off in dissents. I think that sister is laying markers down. So all you young people who thinking about y'all might want to be lawyers, go and go to law school, because we need all of y'all on the Supreme Court. So in 10 to 15 years, y'all can take her dissents right now and turn them into majority opinions. The struggle continues. So we love you.
Love y'all too. Happy Juneteenth.
Yes.
Everybody, this has been a Juneteenth edition of Building the Black Educator Pipeline, hosted by the Center for Black Educator Development with the help from our partners, Bright Beam. So make sure y'all subscribe and listen. See y'all again soon. Peace, everybody.